Through smoke and flame, the amber glow of lanterns cast dancing shadows across the weathered wooden walls of the Golden Rose Cabaret. Outside, the wind howled across the dusty plains of Copper Ridge, carrying with it the scent of sagebrush and the promise of another harsh frontier winter. But inside the saloon, warmth radiated from both the crackling fireplace and the lively atmosphere that had made the Golden Rose the beating heart of this small Texas town. Martha Red O'Malley stood at the bar, her emerald dress catching the lamplight as she surveyed her domain. At 42, she had seen enough of life to know that survival in these parts required both steel and silk. The cabaret girls moved gracefully between tables, their laughter mixing with the clink of glasses, and the melodic strumming of Johnny's guitar from the corner stage. "Another whiskey, stranger?" asked Lily, one of the younger girls, as she approached a weathered cowboy sitting alone at the bar. His hat was pulled low, casting shadows across a face marked by sun and wind. Jake Morrison lifted his eyes, revealing the deep blue of a man who had seen too much of the world's harsh truths. "Much obliged, miss," he said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of years spent under endless skies. Jake had ridden into Copper Ridge 3 days ago, his horse weary, and his pockets light. Like many drifters, he was running from something, in his case, memories of a fire that had claimed his family's ranch in Colorado. The irony wasn't lost on him that he sought solace in a place where flames danced freely in every lamp and hearth. The evening progressed with its usual rhythm. Miners, fresh from the silver claims, celebrated their small fortunes, while cattlemen discussed the harsh realities of the upcoming winter. The cabaret girls, Lily, Belle, Rosa, and half a dozen others, wove through the crowd like colorful butterflies, bringing moments of joy to men whose lives were otherwise defined by hardship and solitude. At the piano, Sarah's fingers danced. Across the keys, filling the room with a waltz that spoke of distant cities and forgotten dreams. She had come west after her husband's death back in St. Louis, carrying nothing but her musical talents and an unshakable determination to start anew. "Play something lively, Sarah," called out Tom Fletcher, the town's burly blacksmith, as he raised his glass high. "Life's too short for sad songs," as Sarah transitioned into a spirited rendition of "Oh, Susanna." The entire room seemed to come alive. Red smiled from behind the bar, counting the evening's takings and feeling for a moment that perhaps they had built something special here in this harsh land. That's when disaster struck with the sudden fury of a prairie storm. Johnny, caught up in the music's energy, gestured dramatically with his bow during a particularly passionate violin solo. His elbow caught the brass lantern hanging beside the stage, sending it tumbling toward the heavy velvet curtains that Martha had ordered specially from San Antonio. Time seemed suspended as the lantern's flame met the rich fabric. For a heartbeat, there was only a small orange glow. Then, with a hungry roar, the fire exploded across the curtains like a living thing awakening from slumber. "Fire!" Johnny's voice cracked as he stumbled backward, his violin clattering to the floor. The word hit the crowded room like a thunderclap. Instantly, the warm atmosphere of camaraderie and joy transformed into something primal and terrifying. Chairs scraped against wooden floors as men leaped to their feet. Glasses shattered as they hit the ground, forgotten in the face of mortal terror. The flames, fed by the dry wood and decades of tobacco smoke that had soaked into every surface, spread with terrifying speed. What had been dancing shadows on the walls became writhing serpents of orange and red, consuming everything in their path. "Everyone out!" Red's voice boomed above the chaos, her years of commanding unruly crowds serving her now. But even as she shouted orders, she could see that panic was taking hold. Near the front door, a bottleneck formed as dozens of men tried to push through the narrow opening simultaneously. Fear transformed neighbors into strangers, friends into obstacles. Elbows flew and voices rose in desperation as the smoke began to thicken. Jake Morrison stood at the bar, his trained eye assessing the situation with the calm that came from years of facing danger. While others panicked, his mind was already calculating escape routes and counting heads. That's when he heard them. Voices from above, high and terrified. The cabaret girls' rooms were on the second floor, accessed by a narrow staircase at the back of the building. In the chaos of evacuation, they had been forgotten by the stampeding crowd below. "Help us! Please, someone help us!" Belle's voice carried down through the smoke, barely audible above the crackling flames and shouting men. Jake's jaw tightened. As he looked toward the staircase, already orange tongues of flame were licking at the wooden steps. The smoke was growing thicker by the second, and he could hear the ominous creaking of wooden beams stressed beyond their limits. Without hesitation, Jake pulled his bandana up over his nose and mouth. The cotton offered little protection against the acrid smoke, but it was better than nothing. He had faced fire before. The memory of his family's burning ranch was seared into his soul. But this time, he wouldn't watch helplessly. Taking a deep breath of the increasingly toxic air, Jake pushed against the flow of fleeing men and made his way toward the staircase. The heat was already intense, and sweat beaded on his forehead as he grabbed the banister and began to climb. "You're crazy, cowboy!" shouted Tom Fletcher as he pushed past, heading for safety. But Jake was beyond hearing such warnings now. The stairs groaned under his weight, and more than once he felt a step give slightly beneath his boots. Halfway up, the smoke became so thick that he could barely see his hand in front of his face. His lungs burned with each breath, and tears streamed down his cheeks from the stinging air. At the top of the stairs, Jake found himself in a narrow hallway lined with doors. The smoke was so dense here that he had to feel his way along the walls. From behind the doors came the sounds of terrified voices and pounding fists. "I'm here!" Jake called out, his voice hoarse. "I'm going to get you out!" The first door he tried was locked. Without pause, Jake stepped back and kicked hard, feeling the wood splinter around the lock. The door burst open to reveal Rosa, a young woman barely out of her teens, huddled in the corner of her small room. "Come on!" Jake reached for her, but Rosa was paralyzed with fear, her dark eyes wide with terror. "I can't," she whispered. "I can't breathe." Jake didn't argue. He scooped her up in his arms, noting how light she felt, and carried her into the hallway. The smoke was even thicker now, and he could hear the ominous roar of flames climbing the walls below. "Hold tight to me," he told Rosa, then began feeling his way back toward the stairs. But as they reached the top of the staircase, Jake's heart sank. The flames had consumed the lower half of the stairs entirely. There was no way down. "Think," Jake told himself. There had to be another way. Then he remembered the balcony. The Golden Rose had a small balcony that faced the main street, used sometimes for special announcements or entertainment. If he could get the girls there, maybe the townspeople could help from below. But first, he needed to get the others. Jake carried Rosa to the balcony door and set her down gently. "Stay here," he told her. "I'll be back." Back in the smoke-filled hallway, Jake kicked down door after door. Belle was in the second room, already unconscious from smoke inhalation. He lifted her over his shoulder and carried her to the balcony, laying her beside Rosa. Lily was in the third room, frantically trying to climb out the small window. "Thank God," she gasped when she saw Jake. She was still conscious and able to walk, so Jake helped her navigate the treacherous hallway to join the others. The fourth room revealed Sarah, the piano player, who had been visiting one of the girls when the fire started. She was conscious, but coughing violently, her hands pressed against her chest as she struggled to breathe. "Can you walk?" Jake asked. Sarah nodded weakly, and Jake helped her make her way through the smoke. By now, the heat in the hallway was becoming unbearable. Jake could feel the floor beginning to sag beneath his feet, and he knew they were running out of time. But there were still more doors, more voices calling for help. The fifth door revealed two girls huddled together, young women who couldn't have been more than 18 or 19. Both were conscious but terrified beyond words. Jake helped them to their feet and guided them toward the balcony. The sixth room held Maria, an older woman who worked as the seamstress for the cabaret costumes. She was conscious but disoriented, coughing so violently that Jake had to carry her. In the seventh and final room, Jake found Nancy, the youngest of all the cabaret performers, barely 17 and new to Copper Ridge. She was curled in a corner, sobbing and calling for her mother back in Missouri. "We have to go now," Jake shouted over the roar of the flames that were now consuming the floor below them. He scooped Nancy into his arms and made his way back to the balcony where all the rescued women were now gathered. As Jake emerged onto the balcony with Nancy, he looked down to see the entire town of Copper Ridge gathered in the street below. The Golden Rose was fully engulfed now, flames shooting high into the night sky and casting an orange glow across the faces of the watching crowd. "There!" someone shouted. "On the balcony!" A cheer went up from the crowd as they spotted the group of survivors. But their celebration was short-lived as everyone realized the same thing Jake was beginning to understand. They were trapped. The balcony was 20 feet above the street, too high to jump safely, especially for women weakened by smoke inhalation. "We need rope," called out Dr. Peterson, the town's physician, who was already pushing through the crowd with his medical bag. "The general store," yelled Martha Hendricks, who ran the establishment with her husband. "We've got rope there." But even as people scattered to find rope and organize a rescue, Jake could feel the building shuddering beneath them. The balcony's supports were weakening, and he could hear the crack and groan of stressed wood. "We don't have time," Jake muttered to himself. He looked around desperately, his mind racing through options. That's when he spotted it, the large water trough directly below the balcony. It was used to water horses and was perhaps 4 feet deep and 8 feet long. Not ideal, but it might break their fall enough to prevent serious injury. Sheriff Williams, who had been organizing the crowd below, noticed Jake's gaze. "You thinking about jumping, Cowboy?" he called up. "It's the only way," Jake replied. "The building's coming down." As if to prove his point, part of the balcony floor suddenly gave way with a tremendous crack, sending splinters of burning wood cascading into the street below. "Listen to me," Jake called to the women gathered around him. "We're going to have to jump into the water trough. I'll go first to test it, then guide each of you down." "Are you insane?" Lily gasped. "We'll be killed." "Maybe," Jake admitted, "but we'll definitely die if we stay here." Before anyone could argue further, Jake climbed over what remained of the balcony railing. The crowd below fell silent, watching. With bated breath, Jake focused on the center of the water trough, said a quick prayer, and jumped. The fall felt like an eternity, but lasted only seconds. Jake hit the water with tremendous force, the impact driving every bit of air from his lungs and sending water cascading across the street. For a moment, he disappeared beneath the surface, and gasps rose from the crowd. Then Jake's head broke the surface, and he gasped for air. "I'm all right," he called up to the balcony. "Come on, one at a time." Lily was the first to follow. She closed her eyes, crossed herself, and jumped. Jake was ready, positioning himself to catch her and break her fall. She hit the water hard but safely, and Jake quickly helped her out. One by one, the women followed. Rosa jumped with her eyes squeezed shut, trusting completely in Jake's promise to catch her. Belle, who had regained consciousness, made a remarkably graceful landing despite her weakened state. Sarah hesitated the longest, her fear of heights warring with her terror of the flames. "You can't," she called down. "Yes, you can," Jake replied firmly. "Sarah, you've performed in front of hundreds of people. This is just another performance. You're the star and the crowd is waiting." Something in his words reached her. Sarah straightened her shoulders, took a deep breath, and jumped with the poise of the performer she was. Maria followed, her heavier frame sending up the biggest splash yet, but Jake was there to ensure she made it safely to the edge of the trough. The two younger girls jumped together, holding hands. As they fell, their courage bolstering each other in that terrifying moment. Finally, only Nancy remained on the rapidly deteriorating balcony. The 17-year-old was paralyzed with fear, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. "I can't do it," she screamed. "I'm too scared." "Nancy!" Jake called up urgently. The entire balcony structure was shaking now, and he could see flames, beginning to eat through the floorboards. "Think about your mother in Missouri. She's counting on you to come home." Just then, with a sound like thunder, the main support beam of the balcony snapped. The entire structure tilted at a dangerous angle, and Nancy began sliding toward the edge. Without thinking, Jake leaped out of the water trough and positioned himself directly beneath the collapsing balcony. As Nancy fell, screaming, Jake caught her in his arms, her impact sending them both tumbling to the hard-packed earth of the main street. Jake felt his left shoulder dislocate as they hit the ground, but he held tight to Nancy, rolling to absorb the impact and protect her from injury. The crowd rushed forward as the entire balcony crashed down behind them in a shower of sparks and burning debris. Dr. Peterson was the first to reach them, his medical training overriding the chaos around him. "Don't move, either of them," he commanded the gathering crowd. Jake's shoulder was on fire with pain, but he managed to ask, "The girl?" "She's unconscious but breathing," Dr. Peterson replied as he began his examination. "You saved her life, son." As the doctor worked, Red O'Malley pushed through the crowd, her emerald dress torn and stained with soot, her carefully arranged hair now hanging loose around her shoulders. Behind her came all the rescued women, dripping wet but alive. "Jake," Red said, kneeling beside him as Dr. Peterson worked on his shoulder, "you got them all out, every single one." Jake tried to sit up despite the doctor's protests, looking around at the gathered women. Rosa was holding a still unconscious Belle, while Lily comforted the sobbing Maria. Sarah stood with the two younger girls, all of them staring at the burning remains of what had been their home. "They're good people," Jake said quietly, his voice hoarse from smoke and pain. "They deserved better than to die in a fire." Red's eyes filled with tears as she looked at this cowboy who had risked everything for women that most of the town's respectable citizens looked down upon. "What's your name?" she asked softly. "Jake Morrison." "Well, Jake Morrison," Red said, her voice thick with emotion, "you'll always have a home here in Copper Ridge. We don't forget our heroes." As Dr. Peterson finished setting Jake's shoulder, and the crowd began to disperse, the full magnitude of what had happened began to sink in. The Golden Rose Cabaret, which had been the heart of Copper Ridge's nightlife for over a decade, was now nothing but a pile of smoldering ash and twisted metal. But not a single life had been lost. Over the following days, as Jake recovered from his injuries, the story of the rescue spread throughout the territory. Newspapers as far away as Denver carried accounts of the Copper Ridge Angel, who had saved 7 women from a burning building. What the papers didn't capture was the quiet transformation that took place in the small town itself. The women Jake had saved were no longer seen as just entertainers or fallen women. They were survivors, fellow human beings who had faced death and lived to see another day because one man had refused to let them perish. Rosa found work at the general store, her quiet manner and careful attention to detail making her invaluable to Martha Hendricks. Belle, once recovered, became a teacher for the town's children, her education and gentle nature perfect for the role. Lily married Tom Fletcher the blacksmith, who had admired her spirit long before the fire made him realize how precious life was. Sarah continued to play piano, but now in the new church that was being built, her music bringing solace rather than revelry. Maria opened a dress shop, her skills with needle and thread much in demand in a growing town. The two younger girls found positions with families in town, honest work that allowed them to build respectable lives. And Nancy, the youngest, wrote to her mother in Missouri and was welcomed home with open arms. Her near-death experience convincing her family that their past disagreements were nothing compared to the gift of having her alive. As for Jake Morrison, he never left Copper Ridge. Red O'Malley was true to her word. He did indeed have a home. There, she partnered with him to rebuild the Golden Rose as a hotel and restaurant, a respectable establishment that served the growing community. But it was more than just a business partnership that kept Jake in town. For the first time since losing his family in Colorado, he had found a place where he belonged, where his actions had meaning, where he was valued not as a drifter or an outsider, but as a member of the community. On quiet evenings, when the work was done and the town was settling into sleep, Jake would sometimes walk past the spot where the old Golden Rose had stood. A new building occupied the space now, a schoolhouse where Belle taught children their letters and numbers. The fire had taken the old building, but it had given birth to something far more precious, a community united by the understanding. The true heroism wasn't found in gunfights or gold strikes, but in the willingness to risk everything for strangers who needed help. 3 months after the fire, Jake stood on the porch of the new Golden Rose Hotel, watching the sun set over the plains of Texas. His shoulder had healed completely, though. It still ached when storms approached. The scar on his left hand, earned when he'd grabbed a burning door handle during the rescue, had faded to a thin, white line. "Penny for your thoughts?" Red's voice came from behind him as she stepped onto the porch, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Just thinking about how different everything is now," Jake replied, accepting the steaming cup gratefully. She was right. The new establishment was nothing like the old cabaret, where once there had been a stage for dancing girls. Now there were comfortable chairs arranged around a large fireplace where travelers could rest and share stories. Where once there had been a bar serving whiskey until the early hours, now there was a dining room that served the best meals between San Antonio and El Paso. "Any regrets?" Red asked, settling into the chair beside his. Jake considered the question carefully. The old Golden Rose had provided a certain excitement, a wildness that matched the frontier spirit. But looking out at the town now, seeing families walking to evening church services, children playing safely in the streets, former cabaret girls like Belle teaching those same children their letters, he couldn't imagine wanting things back the way they were. "None," he said finally. "This is better." As if summoned by their conversation, Belle appeared at the end of the street, walking with young Tommy Fletcher, Tom's 8-year-old son. The boy was animatedly explaining something to her, his hands gesturing wildly as children do when they're excited about a discovery. Miss Belle," Tommy called out as they approached the hotel. "Tell Mr. Jake about the arithmetic problem I solved." Belle smiled, her face glowing with the satisfaction that came from seeing a student succeed. "Tommy figured out how to calculate the amount of lumber needed for the new barn all by himself," she explained to Jake. "He's getting quite good with numbers." "That's impressive, son," Jake said seriously, treating the boy's achievement with the respect it deserved. "Your pa's gonna be proud when he hears about this." Tommy beamed and ran off toward home, eager to share his success with his family. "He reminds me of myself at that age," Jake told Belle as they watched the boy disappear around the corner, full of questions and always trying to figure out how things work. "What made you decide to stay in Copper Ridge?" Belle asked. It was a question she'd been curious about for months, but had never found the right moment to ask. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his eyes following the path Tommy had taken toward home. "I spent years running from the past," he said finally. "After my family died in that fire back in Colorado, I thought the only way to deal with the pain was to keep moving, never stay anywhere long enough to care about what happened to it or the people in it." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee before continuing. But that night, when I heard you all calling for help, something changed. For the first time since I lost my family, I had a chance to save someone instead of just watching them burn. Red reached over and placed her hand gently on his arm. You saved more than just our lives that night, Jake. You saved this whole town's soul. How do you mean? Before the fire, Copper Ridge was just a collection of people living in the same place, Red explained. We tolerated each other, did business with each other, but we weren't really a community. That night, watching you risk everything for women that half the town looked down on, it showed everyone what we could be if we actually cared about each other. Jake nodded, understanding what she meant. In the months since the fire, he'd seen changes in the town that went far beyond the physical rebuilding. Dr. Peterson had started offering free medical care to anyone who couldn't afford it. Martha Hendricks had begun extending credit to struggling families. Even Sheriff Williams had become less of an enforcer and more of a peacekeeper, working to solve problems before they required arrests. There's something I've been meaning to tell you, Red said, her voice taking on a more serious tone. I got a letter from my sister back in St. Louis last week. She owns a hotel there, much bigger than this one. She's offered to make me a partner. If I come back east, Jake felt his chest tighten. Are you thinking about it? I was, Red admitted, for about 5 minutes. Then I realized that everything I've built, everything I care about, is right here. I'm not going anywhere, Jake Morrison. This is home now. Relief flooded through Jake, though he tried not to show it too obviously. Over the months they'd worked together to rebuild the Golden Rose, he'd come to depend on Red's steady presence and sharp business sense. More than that, he'd come to care about her in ways that went beyond partnership. I'm glad, he said simply. This place wouldn't be the same without you. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, other familiar figures emerged for their evening routines. Rosa walked past on her way home from the general store, calling out a friendly greeting. She'd become indispensable to the Hendricks family, her quiet efficiency and honest nature making her a valued employee and friend. Lily and Tom Fletcher strolled by, arm in arm, heading home after closing the blacksmith shop for the day. Their wedding 3 weeks earlier had been the biggest celebration Copper Ridge had seen in years, with the entire town turning out to wish them well. You know what I think? Red said, watching the young couple disappear into their home. I think you didn't just save us from the fire. I think the fire saved you from a life of running away from everything good. Jake considered her words as he sipped his coffee. There was truth in them. For years after losing his family, he'd been afraid to care about anyone or anything, terrified that if he allowed himself to become attached, fate would just take it away again. But here in Copper Ridge, surrounded by people whose lives he'd helped save, and who had in turn helped save his own soul, he'd learned that the risk of loss was worth the reward of belonging. Speaking of good things, Red said with a mischievous smile, I had an interesting conversation with Reverend Matthews today. He mentioned that the new church will be finished next month, and he's been hoping to perform some weddings to christen it properly. Jake nearly choked on his coffee. Red O'Malley, are you proposing to me? I'm just saying that if a certain cowboy hero wanted to make an honest woman out of a reformed saloon keeper, the good Reverend would be more than happy to officiate. Jake set down his coffee cup and turned to face her fully. In the lamplight from the hotel's windows, Red looked beautiful. Not with the painted glamour she'd worn during the cabaret days, but with the natural beauty of a woman who'd found her purpose and was content with her life. Martha O'Malley, Jake said formally, using her real name, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife? I thought you'd never ask, she replied, leaning over to kiss him as the first stars appeared overhead. 6 weeks later, the entire town of Copper Ridge gathered in the new church for the wedding of Jake Morrison and Martha O'Malley. Belle played the piano, Sarah sang, and even Nancy had come back from Missouri with her mother to attend the celebration. As Jake stood at the altar watching Red walk down the aisle in a simple but elegant white dress, he thought about the long road that had brought him to this moment. The pain of losing his family would never completely fade, but it had been joined by something stronger. The joy of finding a new family, a new purpose, and a new home. After the ceremony, as the town celebrated with dancing and feasting in the streets, old-timer Pete Williams, the sheriff's father, raised his glass in a toast. "To Jake Morrison," he called out in his weathered voice, "who showed us all that heroes aren't born, they're forged in fire. And to all the folks he saved, who showed us that courage isn't something you have, it's something you choose." The crowd cheered and drank, but Jake barely heard them. His attention was focused on his new wife, dancing in his arms under the star-filled Texas sky, surrounded by friends who had become family. Years would pass, and the story of the Golden Rose Fire would become legend throughout the territory. Children would grow up hearing about the cowboy who rode through smoke and flame, and they would understand that real heroism wasn't about being the fastest gun or the strongest fighter. It was about caring enough about other people to risk everything for their safety. Jake Morrison had come to Copper Ridge running from his past, but he stayed because he'd found his future. In saving 7 women from a burning building, he discovered that sometimes the greatest rescue of all is the one that saves yourself. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the hotel guests were settled for the night, Jake and Red would sit on their porch and watch the sunset over the Texas plains, knowing that they had built something lasting and good in this harsh but beautiful land. The Golden Rose Cabaret was gone, consumed by flames on that terrible night. But from its ashes had risen something better, a community bound together by the understanding that true strength came not from standing alone, but from standing together, ready to face whatever challenges the frontier might bring. In the end, the fire had taken a building but given birth to a legend that would live forever in the hearts of those who understood that heroism isn't about being fearless. It's about being afraid and choosing to act anyway, because some things are worth the risk. Jake Morrison, once a drifter running from his past, had found his place in the world. And Copper Ridge, once just another frontier town, had discovered its soul in the smoke and flame of one unforgettable night.